This is not Frank Walker, and I'm definitely not from National Tiles. Welcome to another video where I've lost my mind once again. Buildings getting destroyed. Thought it'd be fun. Hope you enjoy. Before we start using the actual building, what I'll do is I'll make a placeholder box that we can use in place of the building. And we'll hide the building, get the wireframe, add a shell modifier to it, and we'll give it a little bit of thickness to the walls. Convert that to a editable poly, add a TyFlow. We'll do birth objects and pick the box. But now we can hide the original box, and in display we can set it to show geometry. We'll add a PhysX shape, so this will work with PhysX. Then we'll add a PhysX collision and pick the sphere, so the sphere collides with the box. So now if we scrub through, you can see it hits the box. See these stupid little border boxes? I don't like those, so if you don't like those as well, you can just press J and that'll get rid of them. When this sphere hits the box, it doesn't break up into little bits, so we actually want to break it up into little pieces. So we'll add this little operator here called Voronoi, I think that's how you pronounce it. Voronoi! So we'll add this before we convert it. So if I go to wireframe mode, you can see all these little fragments now. So we'll just increase these points to say something like 500, 50% variation. We want these initial fragments to be more uniform. So we'll go down here to the point type and we'll just set it to random on shape surface. That'll just make them a bit more uniform. If we scrub through, the sphere collides with it, but they all just fall in on themselves. So we'll add this PhysX bind operator. We'll change it from glue to joint because joint's more accurate. So now they're all bound together. So now if I play forward, you can see that it's sort of, it hits the building or hits the box, but it just sort of knocks it all back because they're all bound together. So we want to break these binds, enable bind breaking, and you've got a few options of how you can actually break these binds. The easiest one to use is force. This basically says if it gets hit, if any of these particles get hit by a force that's 10,000 or greater, then it will break the binds. So now if we scrub forward, you can see that it's breaking some binds, and some of them are staying together. Like, so you can see here, this wall here, and this wall, they basically, all these binds are staying together, but all these ones are breaking. And that just means that the force is, our threshold is probably a bit low. We want to increase that threshold a little bit. So let's just increase it to say 50,000. And we'll test that again. Now you can see that it's sort of doing what we want. So it's only focusing on the area where the collision is, and its exit wound here is exactly the same. So it keeps the building more intact. It feels a little bit flimsy, and we've only got 3 binds per particle. So we actually want to increase this a little bit. So let's just go from 3 to 6, just double it. That'll just increase the integrity of the building a bit more. Yeah. So that's pretty good for now. So now what we want to do, we want to break these little areas here where we focus on the collision. We actually want to break these pieces into smaller chunks. So what we'll do is we'll have to branch that off. So we'll create a new Voronoi fracture, and we want to send these little chunks into this new event to break them even further. So to do that, we'll have to do a test. So we'll do a property test in the first event, and we'll actually check to see if these pieces have actually broken off. So in the test type, we've got a whole bunch of different ones we can use, and if you scroll down you can see that there's actually one called binds broken. Make sure it's the PhysX one because we're using PhysX. So just change that to binds broken, because in our joint setup we know that we've got 6 binds per particle. So if we go back into our broken binds and we say our value is 6, so 6 binds, and if we say greater than or equal to, so if the amount of binds broken is greater or equal to 6, which means all the binds are broken, therefore what we'll do is we'll send them into the next event, which will then break them up even more. So we'll just make sure this is set to geometry so we can see what's going on, and maybe we'll set it to a red color so we can see. So now if we scrub forward, you can see that when it hits this wall, all the binds break, it gets sent into this new event, which breaks them up even further. On the exit as well, you can see. So as it comes out of this wall, it does the exact same thing. See, when they hit the ground, it's not very interesting. So what we'll do is we'll break them up once again. So we'll add another Voronoi fracture, and we'll make sure it's set to geometry, and we'll give it a color of, say, green. Now what we'll do is we'll send them in, we want to send them into this extra crumble event when they do something drastic, like say they're flying through the air, but maybe like when they hit the ground, you want them to crumble again. So what we can do is we can do another test to see when when they hit the ground. But maybe instead of hitting the ground, maybe you now see them, we've got another object, another building in front here or something, or maybe they don't hit the ground, they hit something else, or they hit a collision. What we can do is we can do a property test to see if they've hit something, which basically means if they've hit something, they're going to decelerate, right? So we can actually test for that. So if I scrub back to the start, if we go into the property test, we can actually choose this deceleration magnitude. So now we can test to see if the particles have decelerated. So we'll set this to greater or equal to again, and we'll set this to, say, let's just say a value of like 50. When the second fractures decelerate more than 50, we'll put them into this new event, which will crumble them even more. So if we scrub through now, you should see that when the red particles hit the ground, they should break into green particles. They're hitting the ground, they're decelerating, and they're breaking up into more particles. We want to leave some of those nice big chunks, but maybe we want to crumble just a few more. So we'll just we can just adjust the property value to, say, something lower. Let's say something like 40. See what that does. So we're getting a nice mix of the red chunks and the smaller green chunks. Alright, so one thing we need to do before we go too far is we have to remember that once we send, we have to remember to add a collision to our second fractures of the collision object again, so the sphere, just so that it collides with the new fragments. Not so much the third one, because depending on what your collision will be, we can sort of avoid this in some cases to save a little bit of computing. So now we've got the second particles crumbling into smaller bits, but maybe say these big ones, the initial ones, these are really good when they stay together to keep the integrity of the building, but the ones that sort of escape and go off into the world like this, maybe we want to split those up as well. So based on the same test, when they hit the ground or when they decelerate, we want to send them into this same event to break them up even more. So what we'll do is we can just copy this property test and we can just paste it into our original event. And then what we can do is we can just, this is the same test for the second one, we can just link this straight up to the last little event. So now our big pieces will then crumble into more pieces as they hit the ground. But obviously we'll still keep some big chunks, which is good, that's what we want. We want a good mix of smaller ones and we want to keep some big ones. Now what we can do is we can go back to our birth objects and we can remove the box, and now we can add the original building. Now we'll just simulate this. Alright, so you can see now the building is keeping a lot of its structure, which is great, and all these parts just go absolutely flying. And when they hit the ground, they turn into smaller chunks. If we go back into our settings, we can go to the bind settings, and we can actually we can increase the force. So the force that it takes to break the building, we can actually just increase that, and this will hold the binds together a lot more, so it'll stay more building-like. So now with the force being a lot stronger, we can see that now it's keeping a lot more of that building intact. You can just adjust that value to be, adjust it to be whatever you want. So you can make them break really easy, which will just, basically make the building crumble into a million bits, or you can make it break really, really tough, so it'll keep more of this building together. The next thing we want to look at is see when this ball hits the building, see how it the whole building gets knocked up. It it gets jolted, then it sort of comes back down to rest, and it's almost a little bit comical. So it loses that realism of a building, just being destroyed, because in real life, all this structure, all this foundation down here will pretty much be cemented to the ground. So what we want to do is we want to go back into our settings. We actually want to stick this base of the building to the ground, or to whatever object the building is going to be on. So we'll create a box that we'll use to act as the ground. And then what we'll do is we'll do another, in our initial fractures, we'll do another property test, but it'll actually be a surface test this time. So we'll just chuck it above all the other tests. And what we'll do is we'll pick the box. We'll just leave this surface test to distance, because we want to test for how far away it is from the ground. And we'll just say 10 centimeters is pretty low, so we'll just heighten that a bit to say 100. So when we test to see how close these parts are to the box, we'll actually send them into another event which will bind them all together. And we'll make sure we set that to geometry, and we'll give it a let's just make it blue. So we'll set this into this new event, and you'll see now all the objects, all the fragments that it's picking up are going blue because they're going to this event. So we can tell that our distance is not far enough. So we'll just increase that to say 200. It's alright, we still need a bit more. Let's just go 400. Oh, there we go. So that looks pretty good. So all these fractures now, these blue ones, they're all going to go into this bind. So now you can see that they're all staying together. They're still moving though. They're still wobbling, and that is because our bind, all it's doing is binding them together. But what we actually want to do is we can go down here to see the proximity bind. So we can untick particles so they don't bind to one another, and we can actually tick world. So now they're going to be bound to the world. So if we play now, when the ball hits the building, it doesn't wobble, they're stuck in place. So this is a good way of connecting the building to the ground, and the rest of the building will react accordingly to the collision. And you notice one thing over here, so here's a little bit of a glitch in the matrix. See how when the particles come down and hit the ground, see how they turn blue, and they just sort of stay in place. That's because it's still doing this test. So we don't want it to continually do this surface test to keep them on the ground. If you go to timing, you can see that it's set to continuous, so it'll keep doing it. So we just want it to happen once on entry event. So now, at the start of the event, it'll just quickly bind all these particles together, send it into this event, and it'll only do it initially. So if we play it back now, you can see that it's all reacting as it should. We can move this up here to say the top of the building, and we can just see what happens if we just knock off this top corner. Yeah. So that's really cool. But what we can do is we can just fake the little parts of the concrete breaking. So we want to actually add some small particles that just appear, really, that we can use as little chunks of concrete. When we break it up into smaller chunks, what we can do is, from that event, we can actually spawn new particles. So we'll add a spawn in there, and we'll make sure that it's on entry, so it'll only spawn one particle based on one fracture, but we can actually increase this. So offspring, we can actually, let's just change that to 10. So each one of these red fractures that we make will spawn 10 particles. So what we'll do now is we'll give these particles, we'll send it into a new event with its own shape. Let's just keep it like this for now, but we'll set display to large dots, and maybe we'll set that to sort of like a magenta color. We'll give it its own physics shape. We'll just simplify it to a box so it calculates a lot better. Alright, so you can see now we've got these little sort of these little pink bits. They're mimicking finer detail from the building. We want to create more chaos to these particles. We don't want them to follow the particles, the fragments exactly. We want them to be more chaotic. So we want them to sort of, when the sphere hits the building, we want them more to spray sort of outwards as well. So what we'll do is we'll go back into TyFlow and we'll give it a new speed. So we'll just add a speed mod in here. And we'll keep that around 3D, so they're going to go in every direction, any direction they want. Maybe we'll increase their magnitude a little bit to say 10 and 50% variation. Alright, so it hits the building. See how they're sort of more chaotic. But we've got stupid ones like up here. See how as soon as it hits, it doesn't really get pushed by anything, so it just sort of stays there, and it just sort of looks like it appears in the world and just falls down. So that's not really what we want either. So what we'll do is we actually want it to keep the original velocity as well as spraying all over the place. So what we can do is in this speed, instead of setting it, like basically replacing it, we can actually add it to the current velocity. So if we tick that, now it's going to keep its original momentum, but it's going to spray random 3D on top of that. Alright, so we've got a little bit more chaos to these little particles now. So they're going in a random 3D direction, but they're also keeping some of the velocity that they inherit. But maybe we want to just, we want them to spray out a little bit more. So maybe we want to increase the speed to say something like, let's just go to 15. See what that does. So at the moment, the collision of these little particles is quite small, so we'll change the look of these to, so maybe we'll give it instead of just being some random shape, we'll give it a 3D shape of, let's just say a tetra for now. You can actually choose a whole bunch of different ones, so you can choose like, chunks if you want. The detail of these is going to heighten, which therefore means your simulation is going to get slower, so you can probably get away with just using a tetra if you're not too close to it. We'll just set the scale to, let's just give it a variation of 50, so they're all a few different sizes. And now if we just go forward a little bit, and now we change display to geometry, they go a bit, we can't actually see them because they're quite small. Now so we'll increase the shape to, let's just make it 1,000. Alright, so now you can see the little tetras, the small little chunks. And if we go to the PhysX shape and show the hull, we can actually see now that this is the size of the actual collision. You can see the collision boxes around the tet, so we can see how big the collision actually is. So what happens now, as soon as you make them bigger, what happens is they're going to start going a bit chaotic because they're going to spawn inside one another, and that means they're going to just shoot off in every which direction really, really fast because they want to get outside of each other as quick as they can. So what we'll do to avoid that is in the PhysX shape properties, we'll go to collision and we'll just tick this ignore start penetrations box, so they won't go spastic as soon as they spawn.
Oh, that don't understand bombastic, very fucking spastic.
Alright, so for my small little particles, I've just increased that to 2500 and set the variation to 100. So now you can see them a lot easier now. As soon as it hits, it adds a bit more chaos, so they're a lot more easy to see. Alright, so the fragments work pretty well, but you might want a different way of breaking up this building, and something that's really good about TyFlow is there's this brick fracture one as well, so we can give that a shot. If we turn off the Voronoi ones and we drag this brick fracture in, you can see here this guide will tell you that this is what your bricks are going to be, so we can just change that a bit. So now it's going to slice our building up into all these bricks. If we enable that, now it's split up our building into a whole bunch of bricks. So it's gone through, which looks pretty bloody cool. We can start to simplify this even more now. Because the building starts off in brick shapes, we don't really need to break it up into smaller parts. We just need to keep these bricks flowing. Well, for starters, we'll turn off the small particles. We don't need to see those right now. And then we can start to ask ourselves, do these bricks need to be broken into smaller parts when they break their binds? And probably not. we can still send them into the next event because maybe we want to keep these broken bricks to use for our smoke simulation. So we'll keep them in the event, but we'll just stop them from breaking up. So we'll just turn off the Voronoi fracture. Now they'll split up into a separate event, but they will remain a single brick. And then we can say, do we still want everything to break up when it decreases its velocity? And for now, we can just say no. So we'll just simulate that now and see how this looks. Alright, so it's gone through the building. Bang, 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 bang. And you can see it's pretty good. So, you know, we can keep it this simple because the building consists of bricks. So we don't have to really break them up into too many parts. But it doesn't really make sense to break the whole building up into bricks if we're only colliding up here. And we can simplify this building to only break up in bricks at this area so that the rest of the building can be really light on resources. We'll turn bricks off for now so we can work with it a bit easier. We'll add a point and we'll make it look like a box, and we'll just increase the size a bit so we can see it. We know that the sphere is moving into the building this way, so what we're going to do is we're going to move this point straight inside the building like this, and this is going to be our focus area for where we make the bricks. Now what we can do is, instead of just slicing the bricks from the whole building, we can actually go down to location and we can choose object, and now we can pick our point, and now I don't know if you can see inside there or not, but that's our bricks are only going to spawn from that point. So now we can go down here to size and we can start to increase this. And now, so we'll go activate now. It's only really focusing a lot of detail in this area. It's still going to obviously put little lines down here and on the other side down here because it needs to slice up this part accordingly. But if we just quickly simulate it now, you see we're only going through the section where the bricks are. We go back to the settings, you can see the blue event up here where their pieces are actually supposed to be bound to the ground. They're actually not getting picked up anymore because all these pieces, their pivot points are actually probably up here somewhere, and it's not, the distance is not picking them up. And if we increase that distance to say something like 1,000, you'll see now it picks them up, but it's basically all this blue area. It's basically locking this into place. So now if we play the simulation, it's not going to look very good because this whole blue part of the building is not going to move. So what we want to do is we want to do a little bit of a mixture. So if I turn off the brick fracture for now and turn on Voronoi, now we get back our area that can be bound to the ground, but we can reduce these points dramatically. So we can go to, say, let's just say 10, maybe you want a bit more than that, 40. And then what we'll do is we want to have sort of more of these, it needs to be sort of, we'll try and keep these lines more focused straight so that there's more focus on it, so that they stay more towards the ground. So we can change the type, so we can change it back to cloud, and now we can adjust this scale. So if we turn off this constraint on the scale, we can start to adjust this to sort of flatten out the pieces a bit more. Scale that a bit more like that. So that's looking pretty cool. So now we've got sort of more elongated pieces down the bottom. Now we can add the bricks back to just this focused area. So let's play through this, see what happens. So bang, 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 bang. So we're getting some cool sort of destruction up here, but obviously we're keeping all, smaller detail where we don't need that. So now that we've done that, we can bring back our smaller particles. It's just a couple of ways you can do building destruction. Maybe you want to use these parts for a simulation with something. So, and you also might want to render these with motion blur. So what we can do is we can go to TyFlow, and we've got this little operator over here called export particles. And what we can do is we can drag this into any of these events, and we can export these events separately. Or if we just drop it into open space, now it's going to export every one of these events all together. So we can click objects, we'll create a new layer and we'll call it Ty objects. So now they're going to export into the active layer. You can call them whatever you want. And so there's a couple of important steps that you need to know, and that is definitely keep scale to 0 ticked. When they're not born yet, you can't delete and spawn objects. What it's going to do is it's going to scale it to 0. And that's good because we want to keep the objects where they are and just scale them down so you can't see them, because what that means is it's going to actually still work with motion blur that way. And also max objects, it's only going to export what we say the limit is. So if we've got way more than 1,000 objects, which I guarantee we have, it's only going to export a couple. So we'll just tighten this to say 10,000 so that we make sure we that'll probably get all our particles. So now we can just do export particles as objects. So just click yes. And it might take a while, so go get coffee, have a wank. So it's finished now, so click OK. Now we'll just right click in here and disable the flow. So now what we're seeing is this layer here is full of our objects now. So now if I just click on all these objects, go to properties and say let's just give it a image motion blur for now, you can see that now all these objects have motion blur. Alright, so I've exported all the TyFlow particles as objects and I've put them all in their own layers. So when you export them, you can just make these layers in their different stages. So now we're just going to add some smoke with our Phoenix FD. I've already dragged out a little Phoenix FD box. As you can see, I made sure that I jammed the floor. I've set it to adaptive. You know, if the smoke hits the edge, it'll just expand the grid so we get all that smoke in. I've found before that can cause a few rendering issues if the smoke is on the exact same level as the ground. So if we just move it up just slightly like that, I found that it sort of solves a few of those little issues you might get. So what we want to do is we want to add this Phoenix source. We want to select some of these objects that can emit the smoke. I actually want to use just these stage 2 objects. So these ones, they look like a pretty good amount of objects to use to emit smoke from. And I also then want them to collide with only stage 1 objects. The way to add them into the emitter nodes is we can just right click on the layer to select child nodes. Now we've got these pieces selected, we can go up here and make a selection. So we can do, just call it emit objects or something like that. We can go into our Phoenix Fire source. So now we can just choose add and we can press H. And then up here on selection set, we can just choose our emit objects. So now let's select all of them, and when we go pick, now we'll add them all into our emit objects. You see how the objects just scale up from 0 to 100%? What that'll do is, if you just leave it like this, using the surface force mode, that's going to make the smoke just zoom, like shoot out into space basically, and it's really not what we want, and it creates some weird things. When it hits the ground, they scale back down to 0. It starts to create weird things with the smoke. So I found that the best mode we can use is if we set it to volume inject. So if we choose this, it's going to tell us that we can't have solids. So all we have to do is convert these all to non-solids, which this little option will do for us automatically if we click yes. So now our smoke is set up to work fine with these parts and nothing's going to go weird. So I've just set the simulation to start at frame 21 when they actually appear, and I've animated the inject power. I've just animated it from 1, so it keeps going to what keeps emitting smoke till about frame 67, and then I've keyed it to 1, gone to the next frame, and I've keyed it to 0. So now it'll stop emitting smoke after frame 69. And before we simulate, we just want to make sure that we've got our objects that we want the smoke to interact with. So it won't interact with these because they're set to non-solid. So we want to just unhide our stage 1 objects, and we'll just let the smoke interact with these big original objects. We won't worry about stage 3 or the smaller objects because that's just going to be computing things we don't really need to compute. So we'll just leave it to sort of stay at this simple simulation for now. Alright, so I'll quickly go over my settings for the Phoenix source. So set the volume inject. Highest that it goes to is just 1. I've turned temperature off because we don't need any flames. And I've just got smoke set to 0.5. Make sure you tick motion velocity. And for the grid settings, one thing though, smoke dissipation. So if it's set to 0, the smoke will just last forever basically. But if you start to set it to higher values, then the smoke will clear out quickly. I find that 0.1 works pretty well for this. The buoyancy I set to -10, so the smoke's actually going to fall down. So I figured that would act more like, it's belonging to the clumps of dust. Because I don't want the dust to last forever. I just want it as more of a secondary effect for these chunks. I've set it to massive vorticity, large scale 0.5. Just randomised, I'll just put the amount to 0.2. Set the conservation method to buffered and the quality to 32. And I've just upped the steps to 4. And output, you have to make sure you tick velocity so you can render the smoke with motion blur. And in rendering, if you go to the volumetric options, you can see I've just lightened up the smoke color a little bit, and I've changed the opacity right down to say, 0.025. But that's just a taste thing. You can set it to whatever you want. You got to make sure that when you work in a scene, make sure everything's set to the real world scale, so it makes these settings a lot easier to tweak. But it's going to be different based on your scene. So go to the Chaos Group help section on. It's really helpful to look at this while you're changing your settings. So now that we've got this set up, we can just hit simulate. So we can go up here to simulation, we can just hit start. Right, so now we've got our smoke simulation complete. Click on the grid object, in the preview tab, just click this enable and viewport. So now it looks a little bit more accurate. So now you can unhide all your other objects, and you can select all of them. And we're going to our materials, and you can just assign it a multi-material. So all these materials are going into a multi-material that has 4 IDs. So these materials will go into their corresponding ID. And the good thing about TyFlow is when you break them into fragments with the Voronoi, by default it will set the inside of the breaks to a certain ID. So then you can specify a different texture. I think by default it sets it to ID 1, but if you want to set it to a different ID, you can just go into the TyFlow settings, Voronoi settings, go all the way down to the fractures, and you can override that. So you can tick that on. You can set the inside the caps to be whatever ID you want. So now we do a quick render, just this close up. This should all have motion blur now. Yep, so there you go, all the pieces have motion blur. If I enable smoke back again, smoke going on. So you can even go back in and you can make your bring up the opacity a bit if that's what you want. But it's all preference. This is way too thick for my liking, but yeah. So yeah, I hope some of that stuff at least helped in some way. And thanks for watching, especially, and thanks for all those people who have subscribed to me so far. Thanks for that. I really appreciate it. It's really cool. I'm enjoying making these videos at the moment, so hopefully I can keep making heaps for a while and share the love. Anyway, cool. Catch you. See you. Bye.